Yeah, I'm going to ask you for a little bit more comment in a second. Let's just come on to the Iran-Saudi deal. So here is the announcement by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. Let's see what they're saying. The three countries announced that an agreement has been reached between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran. That includes an agreement to resume diplomatic relations between them and reopen their embassies and missions within a period not exceeding 2 months. And the agreement includes their affirmation in respect of the respect for the sovereignty of states and the non-interference in the internal affairs of states. So does that include Yemen? We'll discuss that in a second. They also agree that the ministers of foreign affairs of both countries shall meet to implement this, arrange for the return of their ambassadors, and discuss means of enhancing bilateral relations. They also agreed to implement the security cooperation agreement between them, which was signed in 2001. And the General Agreement for Cooperation in the Fields of Economy, Trade, Investment, Technology, Science, Culture, Sports and Youth, which was signed in 1998. So this obviously brokered by China. Xi Jinping is absolutely taking the credit for this, and perhaps deservedly so. But if we look at look at this first of all. Iranian-Saudi agreements correspond to Russia's security concept senior lawmaker. This quote from a Russian senior lawmaker saying the sides achieved the most important agreement to restore diplomatic relations, which I consider a fundamental step towards normalization of the bilateral Saudi-Iranian interaction. This corresponds to the spirit of Russia's collective security concept for the Persian Gulf region, and it will contribute to the settlement of regional conflicts. So Russia absolutely applauding this. But the question is, what about the United States? This is a Telegraph's report on it. China brokers deal for Saudi and Iran to normalize relationships in major diplomatic coup. This is a big deal, said Michael Stevens, an associate fellow at RUSI, not because Saudi and Iran have patched things up, but because the US was nowhere near it. Shifts are happening very, very fast, was his comment. But The Economist wanted to walk that back as quickly as possible, but the deal may not end the country's proxy war, nor cement China as the region's new powerhouse. So, Patrick, interested in your views on this first, and then I want to get a little bit more from Vanessa.
Sure. I mean, it's not just Russia's security concept for the region. Iranian Foreign Minister Javid, this was exactly what he articulated at the Munich Security Conference. I think it was back in 2018, or maybe it's 2019, but I think it was 2018. He said that this is what the region really needs, is a Middle East built, run by the Middle East, a collective security arrangement for all the major powers there. And namely, he's talking about Saudi Arabia being the most important one there.
Yes.
So that's now coming into fruition. This is a huge knock to the Abraham Accords, and because that was designed to pull the GCC closer to Israel. And this is a total nightmare for Israel because it's the one thing that Israel doesn't want, which is for Arab countries or for Sunnis and Shiites to be talking together and to be patching things up and normalizing relations. Because the big prize, of course, here is the common market that exists from Iran all the way to the Mediterranean, the potential common market from Iran to Iraq to Syria to Lebanon, and having freedom of movement and trade and transport and an open border between Iraq and Syria that's not plagued with jihadis and various and sundry U.S. Bases there. So, I mean, that's the Israeli U.S. Agenda, really, is to make sure that that region is compartmentalized.
Right.
And that they're fighting amongst each other and internally as well. So this is a big, big step. I think this is hugely significant. And the fact that China is running point on it says a lot. And what does that tell you? China is now Saudi Arabia's #1 client. In fact, the entire Persian Gulf, China is their #1 client for oil sales.
Right.
Okay, and for gas. So that means that China now wants to secure its long-term interests by helping to midwife, as to use a Newland and Jeffrey Pyatt term, to midwife this thing so that we have a stable economic environment there. So this makes sense. It makes sense economically, it makes sense politically. It's offered China an opportunity to show that they can do something that actually works. We'll see how it goes.
Right, okay. And so, Vanessa, we have this report here from Arab News. It's quoting the Wall Street Journal. The headline is, Iran agrees to stop arming Houthis in Yemen as part of a deal with Saudi Arabia. So you're saying this is fake news?
Yeah, it's totally fake news. I've checked it with various sources, and I mean, Iran would not abandon its alliances, and it certainly wouldn't abandon the resistance in Yemen. You know, that even the use of the term Houthis is a Western media trope to try and reduce the size of the resistance to Western imperialism, which is using Saudi Arabia and UAE, and even Israel is involved in Yemen. Let's not forget that. Um, to effectively partition Yemen, steal the resources, etc. Familiar pattern, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, the use of the term Houthis tries to reduce it down to this tribal war within Yemen. Of course, it isn't. The Salvation Government comprises, I think, of a coalition of 38 political parties. So it represents a huge expanse of the political fabric in Yemen. It certainly isn't comprising only of Houthis. Ansarullah is a national resistance movement against Western-driven imperialism, and I guess again, that's what I said. Zionist media is going to be doing its best as it tried to drive a wedge between Syria and Russia. If you remember, it was reporting on, Russia supposedly taking its S-300s out of Syria and taking them to Ukraine, which was also proven to be largely false. And now we see these messages being put out to try and presumably cause division between Yemen and Ansarullah and Iran, but it's not going to happen.
And look, while there might be some question over whether Iran will continue to arm Ansarullah, or as the Americans call them in the West, the Houthis, the fact remains that the preconditions for this agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran stipulates that both parties will work together to wind down the conflict in Yemen. Okay, so that's part of the agreement. That's part of the memorandum understanding. And I think this agreement is showing you that's the end, I think, the beginning of the end of the Yemeni conflict as we once knew it. Not to say that it's going to be an easy one to clean up, because you have almost a country divided and almost partitioned, and there's a lot of international players involved. It would be very difficult to extricate from it. But it looks like the process has begun.
Okay, let's move on then.